What's your take on it from so far, Ricky?
Okay, well, there's a lot that we can cover here. Are we live yet?
Yeah, we're live at the moment. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I wasn't sure there. Did you get us sorted out on Twitter, or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, if you could do it, that'd be great. I had no idea. I was copying the stream key and the URL into my Streamlabs OBS, and it just wasn't having any of it. It's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, we'll probably just have to figure it out later. Obviously, we don't have time to do it now, but yeah, I think we should be live on Twitter now. Hopefully,
Perfect.
if not, we'll just have to sack that idea for tonight.
I mean, definitely something we can obviously look into later on, regardless. So it's
Yeah.
not too bad. Not too bad. What have you been
Well,
up
I
to
was
today?
trying.
Oh, go for it,
Yeah,
sorry.
I was trying. Sorry, I was trying it yesterday and I accidentally streamed myself live and I was supposed to keep it private so the entire world could see me. But yeah, we're live now. We're up. Okay. You ready to
Oh,
go?
yeah, I did notice your little test stream that came up on Twitter. So
Oh my god, it was a nightmare. Yeah, that was not supposed to happen. But
that's right.
yeah, we
As
are
long as you
live
know that
now.
it works on your end, that's the important bit,
Yes,
right?
I know. It
hmm
was up for about a minute, but God knows how many people saw it. But yeah. Okay then.
Not a problem, not a problem. So, the news today is that MP Owen Paterson, who is a Somerset MP, who was essentially he's a lobbyist for a particular company. I forget the name of it right now. Was essentially paid hundreds of thousands of pounds as a lobbyist for this company, and they mysteriously managed to get hold of a very, very lucrative COVID contract during the pandemic, which was I think it was a £7 million contract, wasn't it? I believe, if my
Yeah.
memory serves me correctly. And then this was the manner in which he engaged in this was breaking parliamentary lobbying rules. So much so that the independent body that oversees these things issued him a 30-day suspension, which then went to a vote in the Commons, which the Tories voted to deliberately overturn the suspension and also to tear up the particular the particular body that was in place to be able to oversee these instances of breaking parliamentary standards, which then obviously massive outcry. Everyone in the media, everyone on social media kicks up a fuss, drives this obvious rampant corruption, which is clearly what is essentially modus operandi for the Conservatives now, has been ever since the start of the pandemic, ever since the start of, ever since, since obviously it was the Green Sill scandal as well. So it's clearly par for the course at this point. But for this one, in this particular moment, because it had come up as parliamentary standards and because of the suspension, this one was clearly public knowledge. And then what's happened is, as today has progressed and as the story has broken, as people have kicked up a fuss about it on social media, what has then happened is that they've then gone back on it because Labour boycotted the idea of the new committee that they were going to be putting up to be able to deal with this because they realised that it was essentially just a sham, that there was no point in even engaging with it because it was so insular and parasitic and rotten to the core at that point. Which then led to them scrapping the idea and then adhering to the suspension, and then now he's quit because he realizes that he doesn't want to be in the cruel world of politics. I mean, he has his money now, so he's probably pretty happy with what he's left off with, which is a reasonable summary of the events of today. What's your take on it from so far, Ricky?
Okay. Well, there's a lot that we can cover here.
True,
Right.
very true, very true.
What I would say is basically the absurdity of all of this is yesterday, Owen Paterson was essentially a member of the jury in his own corruption trial. So you can
Yeah.
imagine the scene. The judge is saying, "Has the jury reached a verdict yet?" "Yes, I have, Your Honour. I find myself not guilty." That's literally what took place. And it's so blatantly violated the principles of natural justice. But the Tories don't give a damn about that. They're trying to create voter fatigue. They keep pushing to see what the media and the public will let them get away with. And it turns out that's quite a lot, actually. And if ever they go too far, they just walk it back, knowing the public will let them get away with less obvious offences next time because people will be too drained to fight back or too worn out to even notice. It will just be accepted that this is how politics is done. They're all the same. Yeah, the system stinks, but there's nothing we can do about it. When you have that level of apathy, whatever you have, you don't have a true democracy. But as broken as our system is, we are clearly not as powerless as we often feel. If we raise our voices loud enough, we can still make an impact, as we have done in this case. A cynical person might suggest this kind of thing's exactly why the government wants to regulate social media so badly. they've heard the public outcry, and they were forced to act.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right in that it is just essentially they play this. You know how when somebody tells like a really near the knuckle joke in the pub, right? And then they will say whether they or something, or they make like a really kind of controversial statement when you're just chatting with somebody, and then they will gauge they'll gauge whether they were being serious or not based upon their reaction. And then essentially it's just Schrodinger's asshole, right? It's essentially what the Tories are doing, where they will propose a particular policy or propose a particular piece of legislation, and then essentially either it slips under the radar completely unnoticed by anybody who's not politically savvy, or alternatively it will come and turn into a big public outcry, and then they'll just walk it back. So essentially continually pushing the bounds of what isn't acceptable within political discourse and within political policy making, and then as soon as something comes up that they feel like paints them in a bad light, they can then walk it back. But the issue that I have at this point is that we've essentially got another Hancock moment where someone has made an incredibly large fuck up, essentially, which has shown the Tories for what they are and essentially stripped them bare in their own light so that everyone can see how completely corrupt and completely cynical they are. And they've essentially used him as a scapegoat. They've become the fall guy. So if he's resigned, he's gone away. Well, we can wash our hands of this now. We don't have to care about this now that he's resigned. Which is essentially what happened with Matt Hancock during his scandal, where they essentially used him as a scapegoat, put all the blame on him, and then we concentrate on these individual figures and these individual acts of corruption or these individual acts of negligence, rather than looking at the larger picture, which is that this is an endemic issue with regards to Conservative Party policy.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that, and it's incredibly frustrating because it's the exact opposite way of what you would want your government to do politics. They're supposed to obviously lead us with integrity and be, doing the right thing and everything else, and they're literally doing the complete reverse. They're doing the worst possible thing they can get away with in any circumstance, and just seeing, as you said, how far they can push it. Just look at it this way: an MP can take what is essentially £500,000 bribe, and he can escape any meaningful punishment because he's not really been punished, let's be honest. A nurse can't even accept more than, say, a box of chocolates or some flowers because that would be seen as a conflict of interest. That's how broken our political system is. We have this enormous amount of money in politics, but in pretty much any job. I used to work in a bank, for example. We weren't allowed to accept gifts. And you've got Boris Johnson just like accepting holidays, and all these other politicians flying off around the world on these ridiculously expensive holidays that have just been given to them. We're not allowed to accept anything like that when we work in normal jobs, but they can't accept it. And then what is bizarre to me is how they kind of feel like they're the victims in all of this when they get called out for it. And this is the kind of thing when they talk about Twitter pylons, this is what they mean. They mean us calling this kind of bullshit out. Owen Paterson, he may have been found guilty, but even the original punishment was incredibly lame. A 30-day suspension from Parliament was nothing. And let's not forget, his resignation was voluntary. That can't reasonably be called a punishment. He's had the audacity to portray himself as a victim. I don't know if you saw his speech, but it was just like, I'm not going to go into it because he tried to emotionally manipulate people. I'm not going to say too much more than that, but he tried to blame MPs and the public for unfairly forcing him out of a job as far as he saw it. If we had a functioning democracy, he would probably be going to jail. This is what an all-party committee said of Paterson's conduct. No previous case of paid advocacy has seen so many breaches or such a clear pattern of behaviour in failing to separate private and public interests. And yet the man insisted he did nothing wrong and would do it all again. I was reading a tweet from Low Key earlier, which I thought was really interesting. I've not had time to check it, but I'm going to take his word. And he says, Owen Paterson was employed by those companies and pushed their interests. This is someone who literally used his time as Environment Secretary to push for fracking. This is a norm in our political system, but the companies are their constituents, not us. So he's pushing for fracking. Now, if you're pushing for fracking, you are not representing the people of this country. No ordinary person wants their MP to be pushing for fracking. The only people that do it are the people who are going to profit from us. And if he's taking money from those people, regardless of whether he thinks he's doing anything wrong or not, regardless of whether he's taking direct instruction, it is very clear that that is an incredible conflict of interest, should not be even close to being legal, and they should not have second jobs, let alone be taken what look like bribes. But let's just, for a moment, let's just give Owen Paterson the benefit of the doubt. If he really wasn't lobbying and really was doing legitimate work for these companies, surely they will be keeping him on to do a few hours a week for £112,000 a year, right? Does anybody seriously think that's going to happen?
Absolutely not. No, and you're absolutely right. The actual punishment that was meted out in the original inquiry was completely ludicrous. Like a 30-day suspension, or a 30-day holiday, basically, for somebody who gets paid 80k a year to sit around and then sometimes vote on bills in Parliament, and then also gets paid hundreds of thousands of pounds to be able to lobby in favour of huge corporate interests that are completely opposite to the general interests of the public at large. The people who we pay his bills as an MP. He's there to serve our interests, and he's clearly with a huge, as you mentioned, clearly a huge conflict of interest here, which again shows us all that how much our democracy in the UK, again in a bourgeois democracy that we live in, it completely falls apart because of capital interests being routinely preferred and prioritised over the interests of the actual people who have to live in the country and who have to deal with the effects of the policies that get put into place. The fact that something so brazenly corrupt can essentially be given such a tiny punishment of 30-day suspension, I find completely ludicrous. I'm glad he's gone. I'm glad he's decided to resign. Although it is unfortunate that he did it of his own volition. But he said it was through his own volition. Whether or not some Tory spin doctor down at number 10 has pushed him to resign, said, well, if you take the fall, we can save the mothership, right? Because then if we play this individual game where it's just like an individual Owen Paterson problem, rather than the bigger picture of the failures of liberal democracies in general under capitalism, then we get to compartmentalise the lobbying issue, compartmentalise the opposing interests of the capitalist class who pay his bills, and the working class who have to live within the system, that gets legislated under these contradictory pressures, right? So we need to focus on the larger picture here, rather than just think of it as an individual Owen Paterson issue, if you get my drift.
Yeah. I mean, let's get real here. What this is an attempt to tear up one of the most important sets of checks and balances in our system. If this had just taken place in a Latin American country, the right in the centre would be demanding regime change. It's corruption, plain and simple. Britain loves to pretend it is one of the least corrupt nations on earth. Anyone who knows anything about what's going on knows that's bullshit. So often we enable corrupt practices while pretending it's not actually corruption at all. It's just the way things are done. It's just politics. The loopholes are not there by accident. The corporations are not giving big money to parties because they're really nice. There is always a transaction. They are getting something in return. Corporations own both of our main parties. We fight wars at the behest of these corporations. We basically do their bidding. And if you're getting paid £80,000 a year as an MP and £112,000 a year as a lobbyist, it's not your constituents you're representing. It's a corporation, the ones who are giving you the most money. That just goes without saying. So what we really need people to understand is this kind of corruption. It's not just some small isolated thing. It's actually central to everything. This is how our system works. Owen Paterson may have been caught out, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. When you look at other countries that are no richer than us and they have better services and the workers get a fairer deal and they don't have the same problems with inequality, etc., it's because rich people don't want us to have a fairer society. We have a rigged economy in which rich people buy themselves ever more power and influence to the point they're almost untouchable, or at least that's their goal. And thankfully, in this case, we have seen a bit of a public backlash, but they backtracked only to create the illusion of democracy, not because they actually give a shit about democratic values. If they did, they wouldn't have done this in the first place. And the Prime Minister certainly would not have whipped his MPs to ensure this bill passed in Parliament. MPs normally get a free vote on this kind of thing, so I think it's fair to say it absolutely went against parliamentary norms in terms of how they've handled this entire mess. I've heard that the MPs received lots of emails, far more than they normally would, and not from the usual suspects, and that gave them a bit of a dilemma, because although they are clearly afraid of Boris Johnson after he removed the whip from the likes of Nicholas Soames, they are also afraid of their reputations being irreparably damaged. I think a lot of MPs realised they massively miscalculated this one, and what they've done since, it's about reputation management. It's not about anything more than that. They've not suddenly found their moral compass.
You're absolutely right, although it does speak to the level to which this has just been too heinous for some people that even the Tories, who are just known, they've been, apart from with like the Brexit issues and the votes that happened around like the Brexit era stuff, they are known full well as just obeying the whip half the time. They always stay in line. And they always, again, they try and save the mothership, right? They always go around, well, as long as we can wash our hands of it later and maintain power, that's all we really actually care about at the end of the day. So the fact that there are like a handful of Tory MPs who didn't show up or rebelled on this issue, it just stands to like the level to which this is just completely unacceptable. And we talk about how like it's such a massive failure of democracy. Like we have no democracy at this point. Like we all saw. I mean, I always talk about this on Socialist Chat Room whenever these kind of subjects come up, about the way in which media manipulation went into the 2017 and 2019 elections, because anything that threatens the power of capital immediately gets pushed to the sides. It gets demonized within the media apparatus, and anything that is in favour of the interests of capital gets a brown envelope to be able to get put into parliamentary policy. So we just don't live in a functioning democracy at this point anymore. We haven't for quite a long time, especially not since 2017. It's difficult to live in a functioning democracy when politicians aren't held to account, and when media apparatus exists to be able to protect the interests of capital against working class people and the general population, the population in general.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people tweeting on Twitter today and basically saying what it essentially is an oligarchy. It's just, it's a bunch of rich people in charge. What we are actually seeing is fascism creeping in broad daylight. They're testing the waters, looking for weaknesses in our system and seeing what they can get away with. There was a great quote from Aldous Huxley. I don't have the quote to hand, but it was basically about how the fascism of the future will be more subtle and refined to the point people don't even notice it's there. Just because you don't have death camps and just because you get to walk into a voting booth doesn't mean that you don't have a fascist in charge. Fascism is essentially the merger of state and corporate power. It's when the establishment is ensuring it always remains in charge, does whatever it needs to do to remain in charge, whether that be changing corruption rules, removing the power of judicial oversight, lying to the Queen, or proroguing Parliament, gerrymandering constituency boundaries, purging social media, infiltrating and overtaking the opposition, so we only have the illusion of pluralism. Again and again, these people show us they just don't give a shit about ordinary people. They give a shit only about themselves.
You're absolutely right. Again, it's a very kind of I think Gramsci kind of talked about kind of the hegemonic power of capitalism and the way in which it seeks to defend itself. And it also comes down to I forget. This is a quote that's misattributed to Lenin, but it's not actually a Lenin quote. In that fascism is capitalism in decay, because as obviously you look at tendency of rate of profit to fall, and over time capitalism always tends towards instability and uncertainty, as we've seen over the past 20 years, all the recession, etc., credit crunch, post that. We've all seen the kind of the strings of capitalism coming frayed at the ends, and they have to use fascist tactics to maintain power. I was having a good chat with my friend last night, really. We were talking about the way authoritarianism seeps in, and a lot of the time, authoritarianism doesn't even seep in any kind. It's not half the time. It's not even deliberate. It's just people desperate for power, wanting to use any kind of method to be able to cling on to it in the face of insurmounting odds. People's livelihoods are getting much worse. The cost of living is increasing. We're seeing the rates at which the previous economic paradigms of the way that we would live our lives, where you can work a job and then buy a house and have kids, that doesn't happen anymore. You can't survive on you can't raise a family on a single income anymore. Like, someone's talked to I'm like 21k a year. I was like, well, I can just about take care of myself and my own personal needs. Imagine if I had kids. Imagine if I had a partner to support. I wouldn't be able to do that on the wage that I earn at the moment. These living standards have clearly deteriorated so far, and kids growing up now are only just realising it. Why do you think socialism is so popular in the wake of such market failure amongst young people at the moment, when they look back at what their parents had and what this generation has now, when they realise that, with like millennials, the first generation to be worse off than the previous generation before them. And they understand that. They know that there's going to be uncertainty, there's going to be civil unrest, there's going to be, levels to which people are agitating for pretty stark and pretty radical political change, and they have to be able to use methods to be able to maintain the power of capital in the wake of that. And as you said, it's very clear that fascist tendencies are seeping in because again, fascism being capitalism in decay, which it is right now, because it's not sustaining itself in the way that it has done previously, especially not since the neoliberal reforms of Thatcher in the 80s, taking away the social democratic consensus, which gave working people at least somewhat of a leg up until it all became individualized and neoliberalized after the Thatcher and Reagan administrations of the 80s.
Yeah, I just think, you get with a lot of older people that they don't understand why there is such an incredible generational divide because they're living so comfortably and they don't understand they're living comfortably off us. So when they're telling us, oh, you're lazy, you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and everything else, they don't understand who is paying their pensions and when they're landlords and whatever, who do they think's actually paying the mortgage of their buy-to-let properties? It's us. They're living off us when they're telling them it's their hard work because they've been brainwashed by Thatcherism. They don't understand that what they've actually done is they've created a system where they've completely disempowered us, they've just screwed us over and are essentially leeching off us. And of course there's going to be a huge backlash. Of course you can get people are not going to suddenly turn to conservatism now. This is one thing, it makes me laugh when people always just say, oh, as people get older, they always become more conservative. This generation's not going to become more conservative unless it's actually got capital. It doesn't have any kind of stake in society because we're not allowed to. So unless something drastically changes, our generation is not going to start switching towards conservatism. Now, if we get back to what we were talking about before, because we're kind of drifting a little bit off topic.
We did, didn't we? Yeah.
What I did want to mention, because I think there's some really important points to get in here. The Tories actually wanted to replace the Standards Commission with one that has a Tory majority, so they can always find themselves not guilty. Kwasi Kwarteng said it's difficult to see a future for Catherine Stone. She's the independent parliamentary commissioner for standards, so she's the one who caught a politician red-handed, and yet she is the one who is apparently going to get punished. And I also think it's really important to note that she was actually going to go after Boris Johnson next, so clearly she had to go. I mean, we can't have the Prime Minister being investigated for corruption, can we?
No, quite. You're absolutely right, and they clearly had closed ranks around him. It's clearly it's all this big plan to be able to essentially alleviate Boris Johnson of having to deal with any consequences for any of the actions that he's partaken in for the last couple of years that he's been in power. So I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Kwasi Kwarteng. He's just had an absolute nightmare running around all the news media organisations. Essentially it's become another fall guy at this point. Remember when, during the pandemic, they were just, anytime anything went wrong, they just wheel out Matt Hancock just to essentially breeze over any issues people were having and just bombard us with all of these clearly well rehearsed talking points. And clearly, since Hancock's out the picture now, they've got Kwasi Kwarteng in to be the next fall guy for Boris by saying, clearly there's been this huge massive public outcry and he's trying to reframe the narrative. It doesn't matter if he becomes the enemy anymore, if people dislike him for the brazen way in which he's glossing over people's concerns within the media, because that's his job now. That's his job, just to be able to take the blame and to be able to take the ire and take all the flack and divert it away from the people who are actually maintain the power within the Conservative Party at this point, which is Boris Johnson, Priti Patel, and Dominic Raab and people like that. So it's very frustrating to have to see the way in which it's impossible to hold the people at the top under account, especially when the media won't do it either. The media won't play hardball with these particular people who they wheel out either. I mean, we get to this kind of, during the pandemic, we got this kind of surreal nadir where the only person who seemed to be holding Matt Hancock to account in interviews was Piers fucking Morgan. Like, how low do we have to go where Piers Morgan is the fucking voice of reason? I mean, it's very frustrating, and it's absolutely ridiculous that the person who is taking flack at this point in time is the leader of the Parliamentary Standards Commission and not the people actually breaking the standards in the first place. It's completely ludicrous.
It would be ludicrous in any other situation, but it's politics is norm. And I tell you what really kind of amused me was, if you saw Boris Johnson the other day when he got the interview with the American journalist, and she is actually a proper journalist. She showed how journalism should be done, and she tore him to shreds. And the look of horror on his face when he actually had to ask difficult questions, because he just does not get that. If that was Laura Kuenssberg, she'd be telling him what a great job he was doing. I mean,
And so true.
it's just. And you talk about Matt Hancock, Kwasi Kwarteng, and how they just, they're basically just the kind of volunteering themselves to be basically Boris Johnson's or the media's punch bag. They're just kind of being sent out there to be humiliated in front of the nation week after week. I don't actually understand why they're putting themselves through this. I mean, what are they getting out of it? What are they getting in return? I don't get it. These, these politicians, they're destroying their own reputations. The only reason they've still got a lead in the poll is because the Labour Party is so unbelievably fucking awful and is basically not opposing. And I can't see where, I don't know. I just can't see where they think they're going with it. It's kind of like, yeah, it's this weird situation where you've got both political parties now both think they're going to win the next general election by default. So the Tories think they're going to win because Labour's so awful. Labour think they're going to win because the Tories are so awful. And what we're creating is this incredible amount of apathy. I think there's going to be probably the worst turnout in the history of this country at the next general election, because people are just going to be so unbelievably uninspired by the options on offer. And it really makes me despair. It's one of the reasons why I've been calling again and again for a new party. I think we're living in such an unprecedented time now that I kind of don't see any other way forward. I can't see any way forward through the Labour Party. There's clearly, obviously, the Tories are never going to represent the working class, and we've never, I don't think we've had a situation where people have felt this fed up with politics as they do now. I think there's never going to be a better option to actually start something new. If you have an anti-establishment party now, calling out this corruption really strongly, saying, what, we're going to utterly reject big money, we're not like the other parties, I think that would resonate with a lot of people. I think, we're fed up, basically. We're fed up with the corruption. I think we deserve something better.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think you make a good point about kind of political fatigue in general. People are just like, it's every single day there's another scandal, and it just kind of washes over people now. They're just like, well, I guess this is just life now. It's been hyper normalized to the point of absurdity when people don't even realize that, this isn't normal. This isn't good. This isn't how, politics should be going in this country. How the institution of democracy should be functioning. Like, people just don't get the idea that this isn't okay. This isn't something that we should be able to tolerate. But the level of opposition to it is so pathetic that we can't even have a good conversation about it with people. That's why I think in general, there was like news stories about the Tories looking at maybe calling an early general election in 2022, and I don't blame them for trying. Like, if low turnouts always tend to favour people on the right, and I think that if they hold an election, no one would care. Not just because neither party is convincing enough to want to make somebody vote for him, but also just because people just don't want to have to engage in politics. Like, we've had a year worth of people having to deal with the pandemic and all that kind of malarkey, and trying to grind through such a miserable period in British history at that point, that trying to engage in any kind of political activism or political engagement at that point is incredibly tiring for people, and I don't blame them. But I just think that at this point we as leftists, we have to engage with people properly and say, we can't let what's happening here make you despair. Let it radicalize you instead. Let it give you, the impetus that you need to be able to want to make a direct change in the world and in the system that we live in. I think a different party would be some way in which we do that. Now, I do have, my only level of concern is that I do believe that we still have power in the unions, and whilst the unions still support the Labour Party, I can still see an argument for supporting them up to a point, being critical of what people like Starmer are engaging in as part of the Labour top brass, but still, because at the end of the day, I think if we're going to have proper activism for working class people, it's going to come through the unions. The unions are going to be the bodies that actually facilitate changes in material conditions for the working class moving forward. And having a party in power that is at the behest of the unions, because that's basically where all the fundings for Labour is coming from now, since they lost all of their actual members post Starmer. So I do feel like there's still some We just need to be able to use our voice efficiently to call out the Labour Party for what it is, whilst also being electorally pragmatic in the short term as well. If you see what, do you see what I'm getting at?
I'm not sure you can hear me. Can you hear me still? Because my
Yes,
camera's gone down.
yeah, I can hear you still, just no camera.
All right, I can hear you fine. So I'll just yeah.
Try and
Sorry,
restart.
I was yeah. I did catch you. I was a little bit distracted, but yeah, I kind of see what you're saying, and I think Carrie Murphy and Jeremy Corbyn have basically been making the same point that anything that does come from the left has to go through the union movement. But they did kind of indicate that that could possibly be in the form of a new party, that the Labour Party does not have a divine right to exist. Now, the way the Labour Party is going at the moment, the Labour Party, they're kind of trying to rig their internal systems just in the same way that the Tories are trying to rig Parliament. They're trying to make it so that the left are utterly powerless. You look how we were trying to raise a leadership threshold to make sure that the Socialist Campaign Group could not put forward a candidate to challenge Starmer, and all this other bullshit that's been going on. So they're actually doing the exact same kind of things that the Tories are doing. They look just as corrupt and just as broken. Whereas, for example, the Ford report, and it just, if that's going to be the future path of the Labour Party, if they're just going to say, you know what, we're going to screw over the membership, we kind of see the membership as being our own enemies, and you know what, we're not representing the working class anymore. We're going to mouth off and say we're the party of the working class, but really we're going to be representing corporate interests, and then after that we're going to represent the middle class, and the working class are going to be right at the bottom of the pile. That's basically what they're doing. And if they rig things in a way that that's going to be the long-term future of the Labour Party, and there is actually no way back into power for the left, then what is even the point of Labour at that stage? The only way that I can see that there is a future for the left in the Labour Party is, one, they do get a new left leader, but that wouldn't be enough because it'd have the entire PLP against them. They would have to get a mandatory reselection in. Otherwise, you're just going to have the Jeremy Corbyn situation all over again, where you're just going to have the chicken coop, you're just going to have them constantly undermining. Whenever the media tries to whip up some fake scandal, they're all going to join in against their own party, and we're going to be utterly powerless. So either the left finds a solution to this. I don't know whether they might be able to drive Starmer out by doing something like, I don't know, taking him to court and forcing the release of the Ford report. I don't know whether that would be possible, but that's the kind of thing that they really need to do. They need to try and humiliate him, put as much pressure on him as possible, because I've got little doubt in my mind that whatever's in the Ford report would be absolutely damning. It would be damning of Starmer's allies, might even be damning of him himself. That's the kind of thing that could drive him out. But even then, the left would have an uphill battle, even if they can a left-wing candidate. Are they going to get mandatory reselection after that? I don't think so. I think what the left would do is, I think that they'd back somebody who was maybe, soft left, somebody a lot closer to the centre. A person like that's not going to represent mandatory reselection. They're going to try and, unify the party, which, that's the kind of thing that's not going to happen. Unifying the party essentially means that the left is silent. So further forward, it's yeah, you might not have a guy as extreme as Starmer in charge, but you're still not going to have somebody that's going to be represented of the left. So unless there's some major change in how the Labour Party operates, I really struggle to see what we can do going forwards for the left to have a voice in this country. And by the left, what we're essentially saying is the working class. We're talking about politics that represent the people that are struggling most in this country, the people that are eating from food banks, etc. What the likes of Keir Starmer are saying is, we're going to be really hard on benefits claimants, for example. Like, fuck you. Where I'm from, almost everybody has claimed benefits at some point. Like, people who are in work are on benefits. It's not just something for the scroungers or the lazy ones. It's something for everyone. People who are full-time working families, they're claiming universal credit. You're going to be hard on us now. Not good enough. Yeah. It's not good enough. We deserve better.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely 100% correct. Like, now, I do think that there's at least some room for a kind of like a left but kind of soft left compromise candidate, someone like Clive Lewis or Andy Burnham, somebody like that. I think could theoretically be a compromise candidate for Labour leader. There we go. That's correctly said, that phrase. But I think you're absolutely right. The fact they wouldn't support mandatory selection is a real tipping point. It's a real kind of point of contention that would be the only way in which we can have, proper left wing, I mean, working class, I guess that's really a working class and or socialist representation within the party. And I think you're absolutely right in that regard. And we would have to look at, I think the best thing to look at is kind of targeted third party votes, and looking at it through kind of a pragmatic lens when it comes to election day. When we're doing our campaigning, we can still run through the third party infrastructure to be able to push for specific socialist goals. I mean, we can see that if you have the correct messaging, you have the correct platform, the correct level of engagement, you can be successful with a third party. I mean, I don't like him. I don't like the Workers' Party GB, but George Galloway in Batley and Spen clearly showed that you don't have to have any kind of like known platform. You have to be a known entity with which to be able to win seats in Parliament, right? And I think we have to be tactical in the way that we do that, and strategic, and build power on a local level first. Looking at things like the Preston model that I forget the name of the councillor we had in the first socialist chat room. He put some good stuff about. Yeah, exactly. Got some good stuff about the Preston model. And this is a blueprint for being able to creating local communities that have working class interests at heart. And I think that if we can press more people at a local level first and build soft power like that, and then we can translate that into larger parliamentary power at a later date. I think it's different. I understand the point of view that we could see potential large-scale political sea change in future, but we need to build soft power and local power first, and then build from the bottom up, and build essentially a kind of long-form coalition based on working class values and principles and policy, and like enhancing the material conditions of these people. Right, we have to cut through the bullshit of the media culture war and bring it back down to genuine policies that are going to make people's lives better. Like when you look at people like Starmer, who's supposed to for the Party of Labour, supposed to represent like honest to God working people in this country, turn his nose up at £15 minimum wage, getting cucked by the Tories, who immediately a week later do an extra like minimum wage increase. Literally, like there's no difference between the two. I actually think that I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think that the Tories are more likely to nationalise energy companies at this point than Rachel Reeves is, because they understand that market failure that makes them look bad isn't workable with regards to trying to get themselves elected. So if they're going to have to take something into public ownership, like they did with the railways during COVID, where they just said, "Well, we'll just run them at a loss through the public sector during the pandemic, because we don't want the private companies to go bust over the course of having to not being able to deliver the rail services during the pandemic." And then go, well, if loads of people are going to be without energy, we can't win the next election, so let's just do that right now. Whereas Rachel Reeves just seems like ideologically opposed for some fucking reason, because she's just a capitalist. She's just a right winger at this point. She's ideologically married to that position, rather than somebody like what the kind of current incarnation of the Tories we have at the moment, which is just no ideology, just power. Doesn't really matter what. They'll do anything to be able to maintain it, as we've seen over the past 24 hours.
Yeah, I actually think, like you touched upon there, the Tories would be much more likely to embrace not just nationalisation, but a ton of left-wing policies, more so than Labour, because I think Labour are so desperate to kind of distance themselves from the Jeremy Corbyn era that they're absolutely terrified of words like nationalisation, even though it was one of Starmer's key pledges was to, nationalise our industries, our public services. They're not going to do it now. So, you've got this bizarre thing where Starmer's basically shown himself very publicly to be a liar, to, make 10 very clear promises and then, go back on all of them and then say, oh, but I'm the guy that you can trust to be Prime Minister. I'm the credible one. Really? I don't know. I'm kind of I think like a lot of people now, I'm just feeling very disillusioned by the whole thing. I think party politics is just a mess. I was a Labour member for quite a while. I gave so much to the Labour Party. Now I don't feel like I want to fight for any party, because no party's given me anything to fight for. And you know what? I might be considered left wing. Really, my politics, I've never given a shit about words like left and right wing. It's about showing me something that's going to improve my material interests. My material conditions. And Neither party's doing that. They're not offering anything to people like me. Keir Starmer is just saying, I'm the one who represents the working class because look at me, I'm draping myself in a flag. Boris Johnson, quite brilliantly in some ways, Boris Johnson saying, I'm the one who's representing the working class because I'm the anti-establishment guy. He's actually the establishment on steroids, but because he's unconventional, he's got that Donald Trump thing going for him where he kind of embarrasses the establishment, so it creates the illusion that he's anti-establishment. So that's quite an effective thing, and that's one of the main reasons why the Tories are nailed on to win the next general election is because, they've kind of got the opposition thing going for them where, we're the anti-establishment ones, we're the ones who are going to tear things up and change things for the better, whereas you've got Keir Starmer saying, I am the establishment, I'm going to continue business as usual because my focus groups have told me that's what you lot like. And actually, you speak to actual human beings, and it's not what anybody wants. Everybody, regardless of whether they're left or right wing, is fed up with politics as it is at the moment. That's the one thing you will get people to agree on. You'll say to them, what do you think of our political system? It's a complete and utter joke. It's a farce. It's corrupt. Nobody's listening. Nobody's representing. Everybody's just kind of ventriloquizing us. They're telling us, what we want, what we need, but they're not actually addressing things. They're not addressing, why are so many people eating from food banks? They're not addressing why we can't afford to put our heating on, etc. And every time they do something, it's always to prioritize capital.
Yeah.
We are basically an afterthought.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And the thing is, you were talking about how Keir Starmer going back on a bunch of his pledges and watering down policy, so it's basically nothing at this point, and going away from the value of left wing policy because he thinks that they're so like brain poisoned and obsessed with distancing themselves from Corbyn policy, essentially socialist politics of 2017, 2019, right? They're so absolutely desperate to distance themselves from it that they don't even realise that they're destroying the party. They think that they're married to it so far. They've got this sunk cost fallacy. Well, we've started now. We can't stop. When it's just completely senseless. When people in this country they like these policies. It was never to do with the policies with regards to quote unquote unpopularity of Corbyn, which is kind of a lie anyway. But that's a topic for another time. It was never about the policies, ever. Things like more social housing, a higher minimum wage, renationalising the parts of the NHS that have been sold off, nationalising utilities, rail, bus services. These are all things that people overwhelmingly support all the time. When you poll people on these issues, even people having houses built in their area, council housing built in their area. Even then, they still support these issues, not as much as in general over the general population, but they still support these on a large scale. The fact they come and say, "Well, we can't do these policies because these are Corbyn policies." I'm like, just don't think that. Why? But they just in this mind prison they can't escape from, where everything is just this kind of this Corbyn monster looming behind them, trying to telling them which policies they can and can't do. No, just look at what people like, what people need, what's going to be good at, as you said, increasing the material conditions of the working class in this country, and stop obsessing over this awful optical game that they aren't even winning at the moment anyway.
You know what really makes me laugh about Keir Starmer? If Keir Starmer was who he said he was when he stood for the leadership, he would be the next prime minister of this country, 100%. Because what did he say? He said, I'm going to be the one that's going to kind of unite the left and the right of the party. I'm going to end the warring. I'm going to bring people together. I'm going to cut out all of the fighting. I'm going to kind of be the compromise guy. I'm going to be a little bit respectable, a little bit establishment, but at the same time, I'm going to introduce some left-wing policies. And, we all thought under Starmer, yeah, maybe we'll not get everything we want, but we on the left who are supposed to be so uncompromising and everything else, we would have gotten behind that. Even if we only got half of what we were being offered in 2017, we would have still fought tooth and nail for Keir Starmer, but they didn't want to do that. They wanted to stamp us out. They wanted to crush us, humiliate us, get us out the party, and not give us even the slightest bit of representation. We weren't going to get the slightest concession from these people. As far as they're concerned, they want market-driven politics. They're essentially conservatives. At one point I would have considered them moderate conservatives. Now I'm genuinely not sure whether they're more right-wing than the Conservative Party themselves. I think some of them certainly are, like Rachel Reeves. And it just, we're supposed to have we're supposed to have options. It's not just supposed to be we've got the sensible lawyer conservative in Keir Starmer versus the buffoon conservative in Boris Johnson who pretends to be anti-establishment, but actually they're ideologically equivalent. We're supposed to have meaningful options, and we're not being given any of them.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just it's completely farcical at this point, and I think it's incredibly sad. I think you're absolutely right in that if he had if Starmer had just adhered to the policy platform that he put out when he was gunning for Labour leader, I know plenty of people who voted for him saying, "Well, look, if we're gonna, maybe we do need to change tactics if we're gonna try and get elected, and then maybe we can be more radical then." Keir Starmer has got this. He's got essentially a platform that I agreed with when he was running for leader. I didn't vote for him for leader, but I did have a platform that I at least agreed with a lot of it because a lot of it was just kind of general shared like social democratic values that he put out in his original pledges when he was gunning for Labour leader. Obviously, that's fucking in the bin now. It's been completely scrapped. Like the fact that we have two political leaders who are just proven liars, proven charlatans, proven that you just cannot trust them. That to point at which, well, why would you ever go with the politician who you can't trust, who's also completely fucking ineffective and pathetic? He never holds the Tories to account on anything. The whole, like, we've literally been through a pandemic where hundreds of thousands of people are fucking dead, and we can't even get the leader of the opposition to hold them into account. It's ludicrous. It's ludicrous. Like, say what you want about Angela Rayner, and she's done incredibly cringe stuff, like the Corbyn photobomb things, and her like trying to distance herself from the union movement that she grew out from, and stabbing Rebecca Long Bailey in the back. But at least she uses her platforms to attack the Conservatives for their failures, and she at least pretends to front-facing. I don't know what she actually believes, but at least she puts forward the idea that left-wing proposals are good. She takes the initiative to say, look, we'll want to offer a contrary narrative to what the conservative intelligentsia are spinning. But Starmer's pathetic. He's a fucking waste. He doesn't do anything. What fucking forensic Keir Starmer? But it's a bunch of. It drives me up the wall. It really does.
What Keir Starmer doesn't understand is Keir Starmer thinks he's put himself as being the respectable conservative versus Boris Johnson, who's not the respectable conservative. What's actually happening in reality is Keir Starmer is looking like the weak conservative and Boris Johnson's looking like the strong conservative. Boris Johnson is so strong that it doesn't matter how badly he fucks up, he still maintains popularity. Keir Starmer is so weak that it doesn't matter how badly Boris Johnson fucks up, he can't gain any popularity. So he's looking weak, he's looking ineffective, he's looking like no matter how tough he is against his own party, he's looking like he can't control his own party. He just alienates them. He completely fails to win anybody over, and everybody's kind of just looking at Keir Starmer and thinking, what is the point of this guy? The Conservatives aren't going to vote for him because they're going to vote for Boris Johnson. The kind of moderates or the floating voters, they're completely indifferent to him. None of them are excited by him, apart from a tiny handful of people with FBPA in their profile who are maybe a bit centre-right. There's maybe a few thousand of those on Twitter. Beyond that, absolutely nobody gives a shit about anything Keir Starmer has to say. You look at him when he goes out in the public and tries to speak to people, he looks like he's never had a conversation with a human being in his entire life. And it's just like, he can't relate to normal people. Look at whatever people might think about Jeremy Corbyn. When Jeremy Corbyn went out and met people, he'd pick up their babies, they'd put their arms around him or he'd put their arms around them, and people were genuinely affectionate towards him. And even when it was people that didn't like him, when they were asked what they thought about him after meeting him, more often than not, they would say that he was really nice and really likable, and you got that quite a lot. And I remember there was one woman who met him and she'd said something like, she'd thought that Jeremy Corbyn was a terrorist sympathiser or something, and they said, do you still think he's a terrorist sympathiser? And she went, no, probably not, because she met the real man. And that was the Jeremy Corbyn effect. The more you saw of Jeremy Corbyn, the more people liked him. That's one of the key reasons why he surged when he went out campaigning in 2017, because people were seeing him and he started attracting these massive crowds. Keir Starmer saying, I'm not going to go out and do these public appearances. The reason why is because nobody would turn out for him, and anybody who did see him on camera, they're going to be completely uninspired by him. When he does speeches, he's completely wooden. When he tries to talk to people one-on-one, he doesn't know what to do. When he tries to ask difficult questions, he's terrified to answer them because he's terrified of sounding too conservative. He's terrified of sounding too left-wing, and he doesn't know which way to go. So he kind of just freezes, and he's like that. He's like a rabbit in the head, in the headlights. And, it's like, if you want to be a leader, one of the first things that you do is you've got to not be afraid to make yourself unpopular among a large chunk of people. So this is one of the things you would hear, what I heard from Jeremy Corbyn about Jeremy Corbyn quite a lot from Conservatives was, you know what, I don't like what Jeremy Corbyn stands for at all, but what I do is I respect that he's a man of principle and he stands for something. Keir Starmer's not standing for anything, and we've got two main leaders who are both, neither of them I think are standing for anything. Both of them are just desperate for votes, however they come in, and that it can sound like it's a sensible thing from an electoral strategy, but what it actually means is nobody gets represented and everybody loses. And I just think, people are seeing through it now. That kind of politics is dead. It's in the past. Once upon a time, it would have worked. I remember when I was younger, my level of politics was, David Miliband, he looks good in a suit. He looks like a statesman. Maybe we should make him prime minister. Eventually, what happens is we start seeing through that and we start realizing this kind of politician offers us actually bugger all. And in the case of David Miliband, it turned out he had complete utter contempt for the working class, which is really galling because he was actually an MP. He was parachuted in just up the road from me, and it was like he had no affinity with the area whatsoever, no affinity with the people. We're fed up with that kind of crap. We want people who actually give a shit about us. When you've got politicians like we've got, luckily in my area, we do have some really good politicians who are like proper working class people, but it's like a tiny handful of them. We had one obviously up the road, Laura Pidcock. She was we lost her. We need more politicians like that, and it's one reason I just think if we had a new party, we could be standing, Laura Pidcock's in every seat, and I think that's what we need. We need that kind of person, Laura Pidcock, Zora Sultana, that kind of person. We don't need Keir Starmers. We don't need David Miliband. So, that kind of politics, I think, is over. I think it actually died with Gordon Brown, if I'm honest, and I don't think there's any going back to that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We live in, and like the crazy thing. I was watching a really good video by Zex Easy. Well, he was talking about in the kind of the scheme of American politics. We're talking about, okay, well, if the Democrats are in power, it's not like we don't get anywhere near close to like the kind of social democracy that America needs, but at least you can try and move the Overton window from there. Sure, you can win over like the liberal voters, like the swing voters who are engaged in politics. There's a huge number of people who are completely disengaged from politics who need something to. They need to have something to vote for. Don't need
It's
to
actually
vote
the largest
against.
chunk of the electorate.
Exactly. These are people we can reach out to. There's always going to be the next moment. There's going to be the next like BLM movement. There's going to be the next. Well, I mean, obviously, Extinction Rebellion kind of died, but without getting too much impetus. But there are other movements like this, large mass movements of people understanding that we can't continue this way forever. Like the planet's finite. The planet's dying. The gap between the rich and the poor is growing vastly. Like people will understand eventually that these times of crisis are going to be upon us again. And when that happens, like when you remember looking at videos of like the BLM protests in Portland, and it was just people's mums, like people's mums coming out to protest in support of a large scale political activist movement in the form of clear bias on the part of the state against people of color in the United States, right? That movement's going to come again. Something like that's going to happen again when we see levels of civil unrest, level of civil disobedience, levels of people who've realised they're tired of taking shit, right? That's going to happen again. And we need to be there with the answer. We need to be there to engage these people, to radicalise these people, to get these people on board with things like, look, things may suck now, but there's a better way. Things can change. You have the ability to be able to help bring about change, because these people are otherwise going to be completely disinterested. We need to sell the socialist vision to these people and say, look, like you're going to work 45, 50 hours a week, getting paid shitty wages, so that both you and your partner have to work to pay your rent and to feed your kids, right? Like that was not a world we lived in 40, 50 years ago, where you could buy a house and support a family on one income. Like say we can have that again. That can happen. Like they're trialing things like 4-day work weeks and universal basic income in European countries without fucked political systems like ours. These things that we can have. We can make life better for working people. We just have to get them to have the will to want to see the change. And we're not going to get that from charisma vacuums like Keir Starmer.
Yeah, one point I would like to make is I just think the reason every time I make a point of this, everybody just thinks I'm attacking all boomers. I'm not. But the reason that we're in this situation now is because of the boomer voter base is basically outvoting us. You know, they're outnumbering us. 20 years from now, that's not going to be a thing anymore. And in 20 years' time, I don't think my generation, even if we have a bit more wealth and a bigger stake in society, I don't think we're going to forget what capitalism's done to us. I think our generation is so deeply scarred, just I was just personally kind of so taken aback by the lack of opportunity. I was one of the Thatcher children. I grew up in the Thatcher years, and we grew up with this idea that things were going to get much better. It was horrible. We hated Margaret Thatcher, but we really were optimistic that things were going to get better, and they started to get a little bit better for a while in the Blair years, and then they started to get worse again, and we realised we'd just been lied to and we'd been screwed over, and our futures had basically been stolen. You mentioned earlier that you're on £21,000 a year. Now, where I'm from, £21,000 a year is a good fucking wage. It makes me laugh when they'll say things like, "Oh, just get a better job." It's like, there are no fucking better jobs. Like, just stop patronising us. Unless you want us all to move to London. Like, what do you want everybody in the country to move to London? You've literally, northeast towns like mine, you've left us with absolutely naffle. Everybody, literally everybody, is on a crap wage, bar about 1% of us, if we're lucky, that might have a better job. The people who have better jobs tend to be the ones who go and work away somewhere and then come back home again. Around here, there is just nothing. And I think no matter what happens, 20 years from now, if my generation is doing a bit better financially, but we see that 20-year-olds to 40-year-olds are being screwed over like we were, I think we're going to remember what that feels like. And I think the establishment knows this. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're looking now at kind of changing things around within our democratic system to disempower us, because they know that the game is close to being up for the establishment, and the establishment's got two options. It can either go with the democratic will of the people and it can start treating us more fairly, which it really doesn't want to do, or it can kind of get a bit more authoritarian, tighten the screw, and as you touched upon earlier in this, that's going to kind of lead to loads of civil unrest, and things are going to get very messy, basically. So the ball's essentially in their court. We don't want this fight. We just want to be treated fairly, and we just want representation. We're not the ones being unreasonable. Let us earn a fucking living wage. Let us actually be able to afford to put heating on. Let us, I've got a hole in my kitchen ceiling that's been there for God knows how long. I can't afford to fix it. You know what I mean? Things like that. It's like middle class people just kind of take this for granted. And I say middle class people down south, basically, because people up here, like, I don't know any middle class people. We've just got nothing. We can't even afford the basics of life, and it's not because we're stupid. It's not because we're lazy. No, this is systemic. It's anybody who kind of thinks that we live in a meritocratic society, they have to explain regional inequality, and that's one thing that you can't explain. If you think that this is a fair society and society's working correctly, then explain to me why the Southeast is doing so much better than the Northeast. Do you think we're like intrinsically less hardworking, less intelligent, less capable than you lot are? Because if the answer to that is no, then you have to accept that the problem is actually systemic, and when nothing is being done year after year, generation after generation, you have to say that what we actually need is a major change.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it stands to reason. I was on Twitter at one time, and I was watching. I think it was I think it was last week, and Benjamin Butterworth was responding to a tweet about living standards, or whatever, by saying, well, there are some people on 30k in London who can't. They're finding it difficult to get on. I'm like, it is. It's incredible to me, like the way in which kind of liberal conversations go, where liberals think that 30k is somehow not it's like somehow like a low wage. Well, that's above the median wage. Like, the median wage in this country is £27,000. Like 30k is like gold dust as far as I'm concerned at this point. The liberals just don't. They live in a different world than we do. Like middle class liberals like this guy, and it's frustrating to have to deal with. And you're absolutely right. We don't live in a meritocratic society. I fucking hate it when people say, "Oh, just get a better job." I'm like, first of all, you're absolutely right. There are no better jobs. And second of all, like, okay, do the people who say get a better job, do they not shop at Tesco? Do they not? Do they not eat out at McDonald's? Do they not, use all of these facilities that need working class people to be able to work at, right? Like, Do they not use these facilities? Like, what happened if every single working class person became like a management consultant overnight? The entire economy would collapse. Like a year ago, working class people were key workers, we were essential workers, we were people that the economy we were completely invaluable to the economy as it stood. I'm like, well, okay, so what you're saying is that even though we're completely invaluable to the society we live in at the moment, that we shouldn't expect to be able to take care of ourselves on the wages for the jobs that we do that are invaluable. It's completely like a completely circular logic that doesn't make sense in any kind of regard. Like, it's maybe it's just me. Maybe this is just like an axiomatic position that other people don't hold. But I think that if you work a job, right, you should be able to afford to be able to live a life with at least some level of luxury, to be able to buy a house, to be able to have a family. I don't think that's too much to ask. Do you like? I think most people would gel with that opinion for what I think a good society should look like, which we don't have at the moment. We don't have anywhere close to that. It's like that's a pipe dream for everyone in our generation, because we've been removed from home ownership, because they've not been like, the private sector hasn't built houses, because why fucking would they? Why would they increase their supply and make their assets drop in value? Why would they do that? We've been removed from good pensions. We've had our entire, like, we're looking at an NHS that's probably not going to deal with the level of care that we're going to need when we reach their age, the age of what the boomers are now. Like, I don't fault boomers for the way in which they vote. Like, everyone at some level is molded by their material conditions at the end of the day. And a lot of boomers now they've quit the workforce. Their level of wealth is tied to their value of their house. And so they're just going to want to look for policy platforms that are going to keep that continuing to go up. Like, that's terrible for us, right? But as far as they're concerned, that's their own personal interest. That's what's going to motivate them to get engaged with the political sphere. Now they're not part of the workforce anymore. All of the policies that a good Labour Party would be able to put forward that would benefit them if they were in the working population, they don't care. They don't have to care. They don't have to look towards that, because it's not in any way going to affect them. You look at there's a really great article on New Statesman where they looked at the election results of 2019 with and without retirees. If you take away retirees, every single income bracket up to £100,000, majority voted Labour over Conservative, right? Like, it's not this. You kept hearing in the press, oh, Labour are losing the working class. That was like during the Corbyn era. That was absolute bollocks. That was not true. Maybe it's true now. Maybe it's true now that Starmer just has completely given up on working class politics. But during the Corbyn era, that was just fundamentally not true. The problem is that we live in a country where working class is like a vibe that people think, they internalise that what actually working class is just like a vibe. It's, do you speak a certain way, do you wear certain clothes, do you act a certain way, rather than a economic relationship to the means of production, which is what it actually is, or a level of income that you have to be able to live off, the material conditions that you live in, which is far more unifying than any kind of cultural trappings that have traditionally surrounded that really don't. Like, who is more working class, someone who lives in Bolton but owns an artisan pizzeria, or someone who lives in in the city centre in, say, Birmingham or somewhere, but rents their own apartment and earns less than 20k a year on minimum wage? Maybe they have liberal values, like, quote, like they live on the wrong side of the culture war. But does that make them any less working class? I don't think so.
It really drives me crazy, because it just seems to be this thing where, like you said, if you've got an accent, then that's enough to be considered working class. You actually have a lot of very privileged people deliberately putting on an accent because they want to sound more street and sound like the more working class. It's just ridiculous. You don't judge working class by that standard. It's like, what was it? I think the BBC, the news channels, they used to always wheel out this guy. I can't think of what he's called, and he owns a plumbing firm. He lives in a villa in Marbella, and he would be the one that would lecture us on what the working class want and tell us how the Labour Party's out of touch with the working class. We had Lord Sugar, Alan Sugar, telling us, because he's got a bit of an accent, he's the one that knows what working class people want to say. Mate, you're a freaking multi-millionaire. How much have you got in the bank? Like, when was the last time you went without food? You don't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like when you've got to buy your fucking kids' school uniforms and you're thinking, do we go without food for a couple of days so we can buy these fucking uniforms? You don't understand any of this shit. Stop lecturing us and stop talking about all this bollocks about entrepreneurs and stuff. That has no relevance to my life whatsoever. Stop talking about crap like the stock markets or even the housing market. It has no relevance to my life. Tell me what you're going to do, what your plan is to make sure that people can eat, have a roof over their heads, feel comfortable. But the elephant in the room is this. The elephant in the room is that they don't want to change any of that because they want to keep us disempowered, because that's the optimal way for the capitalist system to work. They have to keep us disempowered because that's how they can force us to work longer hours. That's how they can get away with paying us less, because they keep us in a weakened position where we don't have any rights, we don't have a real voice in the system, and we just have to do as we're told.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the more we have to work and the harder we have to think about working, the less likely we are to have the energy to engage in political action. Like, there's some ridiculous shit. I saw an article in the Telegraph about how millennials have taken up polyworking. Like, no, what you're describing there is people who are so poor they have to take up a second fucking job. Like, it's completely ridiculous. Although I was seeing what some millennials were doing. They were taking a second job but working them both from home at the same time, which I think is genius, because it's like the way in which we organise work at the moment in a post-industrial, post-automation society is completely fucking unreasonable. We just have this weird attachment to the idea that 40 hours is what people should be working if they deserve to be able to participate in society. When with automation we don't really need to. And we get paid for the amount of time we have to give up. We have to allocate a certain amount of our lives to be able to make other people richer, for them to take our surplus labour value, right? That's what we have to be able to do. And really, we should get paid on what we produce, on the level of what we actually do for a company. That's why I'm a big fan of the worker cooperative model, because not only does nobody have any of their surplus labour value extracted because everyone votes on the way in which the company revenue gets distributed between the workers within the company themselves, but also because you have a actual market feedback from the decisions you make within the company within a cooperative. You then have your own personal drive to want to make it better because you see the direct remuneration from the fruits of your labour that you engage in. Whereas if you're working in a company where they just pay you a wage and that's it, you're incentivized to not care. You're incentivized to do as little work as you can and get away with not doing work for as much of the day as possibly can, because it doesn't matter whether you're the star employee, whether you're employee of the month, you're still going to get paid minimum wage at the end of the day, like minimum wage, minimum effort. Because I know people who are software developers, right? And what they'll do is they'll get told, well, you've got to be able to create this piece of software, but we're going to pay you the same rate per hour, whether you do that in the first 2 days, in the first 5 days. So why would you take 2 days over it? Well, it's completely inefficient. It makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked so many jobs, and I think we've all been there, where you get your work done quicker than everybody else. You don't get any thanks for it. I remember one of the first jobs I had when I was young. I got a Christmas job at Marks and Spencer's, and when we got our review at the end, it left me so exasperated, and it was a real eye opener for me, for this is how the real world works, because I was grafting so much harder than everybody else. I was working at twice the rate of everybody else. And then I would go up to one of the managers and I would say, I've done everything now. Is there anything else you want me to do? The way they framed that when they gave me the review at the end of the contract, because it was just a temporary contract, is they said, you look like you needed help all the time. You were always asking for help. I was like, are you having a laugh? I was like, when everybody else was standing around talking, I was grafting my arse off, and you're throwing that back in my face. It's like, I didn't need help from you. It's like, I'd literally done everything. And it's just, you realize how utterly thankless having a real job is. This bollocks that all you have to do to get far is you just have to work hard and impress your boss. Your boss does not want to be impressed by you. The harder you work, the more they just want to exploit you. You will do all of your work and then you'll get somebody else's work to do as well. And they will think that's absolutely fantastic. That's just the system we have. And that's why worker cooperatives are so important. The way that I view worker cooperative, it's imagine if the union and the workplace merged. That's kind of what it is. It's like you've just got that voice directly in your workplace rather than it being a separate thing. Because when it's a separate thing, it doesn't have anywhere near the same impact. And I mean, if there was an argument against making every big company a worker cooperative, I don't know what it is. And
Yeah.
I think this is the kind of thing that we really need to educate people on, because I think the more people kind of become aware and understand what worker cooperatives are and how powerful they can be, I think the more people will say, well, why the fucking hell are we not doing this? This is something that society needs to be moving towards. I don't think it's necessarily the be all and end all. I don't think it's going to be the end destination where we kind of solve all of our problems. There are still going to be big problems associated with it. For example, under kind of essentially be a market socialist system, you're going to lift a hell of a lot of people out of poverty. What you're probably going to do is you're probably going to create a hell of a lot more consumerism as well. You're going to be consuming a shit ton of resources. And obviously, we live on a planet of finite resources. We're going to have to start planning our economy and everything else to figure that side of it out. But it would be a step in the right direction. And I think it's just such a logical next step for society to take. And it's just a no-brainer, because it wouldn't cost us anything. It would actually make businesses perform better, because, as you said, the workers would be incentivized. It wouldn't, socialism, it always kind of gets accused of, oh, you lot don't understand economics. Well, this is a move that would make perfect economic sense. It would improve the economic situation of the country, inarguably. The only people that would lose out are the bosses who are currently in a position where they can pay themselves any amount they want, because suddenly the workers would be deciding what the bosses get paid rather than the bosses deciding what the workers get paid. So you'd see a complete role reversal, and that would be very interesting. And another thing is, in a situation like that, you're not just having to win over your boss is having to win over you. So it means they've got to fucking work for you. And that could be an absolute game changer for society. So I think that is a message that the left can really latch onto. And I think if there was, for example, a new left-wing party, that's a message they could really get behind. They could focus on the climate crisis, obviously, because that's like the big issue of our time. But they don't have to throw loads of policy proposals at us. They could just keep it nice and simple and say, you know what, we're going to change to this system where we're just converting all of the big businesses into worker cooperatives, and you're going to have more voice in the system, and this is going to result in more pay for you without it actually costing the economy a penny. I think that's a message that could really resonate with people if we actually push that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we get so much of our lives are like we think we live in a democratic society when so many of the things we have to engage in life are completely autocratic, and the workplace is one of those places. And I absolutely agree. I think you're absolutely right. It would be a game changer to get people on board. The fact that as a socialist voter in 2017, I was only made aware of the Inclusive Ownership Fund as a policy platform after the fact. I mean, first of all, it is an indictment of the media for not being able to put that across to people in a good fashion. Obviously, I know why they wouldn't, but obviously, that's clearly an issue. But second, of course, so it kind of hit home, like how kind of Labour needs to make their messaging better. They kind of shot a lot of policies at us, and we just kind of have to. It was kind of policy overload. Whereas if they just stuck to a bunch of clear things, and the Inclusive Ownership Fund was a really, really good policy that would have moved power from bosses to workers, was a really good platform to kind of build off. And I think you're absolutely right. And there is definitely plenty of problems with like market socialism as a concept. Like adhering to the commodity form it doesn't stop the overproduction that is kind of endemic to market systems in general, to commodified market systems specifically. But I do think that being able to take away majority power from capital and move it into hands of workers essentially gives us the political power to be able to make further changes moving forward, because people are more involved in their workplace. I mean, they're more involved in politics, they're more involved in decision making, is going to give them the individual impetus to want to get involved in seeing further systemic change moving forward. So I think it's a good kind of stepping stone to more radical change later on. But you're absolutely right. Like, from like an economic perspective, there's really no brainer. All the studies show they're more resistant to price shocks, and that they're more like they create more productive workplaces and people work in them happier. Like, there's no real reason not to do that.
Well, you would feel like you were part of something. I don't think I've ever worked a job where I felt like I was part of something, where it mattered, where I felt like I was cared. I've had jobs where I've liked going in just to see the people that I work with. And I think that's the one thing that kind of keeps most people going into jobs that they fucking hate. But imagine going into a job where you actually felt like you were part of something, you were building something together, and that it was benefiting everybody. Imagine how much more motivated you would feel. We're not even necessarily talking about, let's all pay ourselves huge sums of money or anything else. Just the fact that you weren't being treated like dirt, that you were being given a fair share of whatever the company's made, from a psychological standpoint, that makes a huge difference. I've worked jobs where we've had to ask for permission to go to the toilet. It's just humiliating. It's completely, um, it's kind of just like with a lot of people, it's in these workplaces, it seems to be power for power's sake. Like, if you turn up 1 minute late for work, it's the end of the world and you're the most terrible person, and if it happens again, you'll get fired. But they will think nothing about keeping you behind for 10 minutes after work. And it's just this balance
Exactly.
of power. And we need as a society to be addressing that. But the moment we start addressing that first thing, like you said, the democracy in the workplace, everything else, all the other kind of power structures that are in place will just crumble one by one. And that's why the establishment will do everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen, because they want to keep the system how it is. They like their wealth, they like their power, they like to be kind of living in a different world from the rest of us. They don't want to be seen as fucking equals. They don't want to be, living in the same kind of places as us, earning similar amounts of money to us or anything else. That would be fucking horrifying to them. They think they're superior to us in pretty much every way, and they want to keep it like that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Again, it's cultural hegemony in practice, and that's why they character assassinated Jeremy Corbyn in 2017, because they didn't want to have to give up percentage of their shares to workforces, because that's, again, it affects their bottom line. They have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to engage in character assassination to be able to protect their profit margins, because that's literally what they exist to do. And if they didn't do that, the system would fall apart, and that is why capitalism is bad. Essentially, I wish I could be a little bit more erudite than just calling capitalism bad, but it is. It is a system which is it generates. I mean, I guess all systems do. They generate attitudes that perpetuate the system. That's Gramsci in a nutshell, really. But it's like the way. That's why That's why I think new alternative media is such an important platform to getting our views across. Obviously, it can be difficult when we look at things like the way in which platforms can remove our content if we do, but we can always find ways around that. Being able to get our message out there to people that a better world and a better life for everybody is possible. It's a thing we can do. We just have to have the will to power.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think, that's basically what I think we on the left who are on Twitter and other platforms quite a lot. I think that's basically our goal. It's about growing a movement, growing networks, because we've realized we're tapping into something essentially. It's almost like it's a new way of unionizing, so the unions were a kind of way for people to collectively get a voice. It's a new way to collectively build a voice, and it's a new way to fight back against power. And of course, that's why they've been looking at everything they can to kind of take that away from us. I think the establishment has realized they've maybe got about a 10-year window of opportunity because after that, the voting demographics in this country are going to look so different. If they don't get to grips with this within the next 10 years, I think they've realized that the game's probably going to be up for them. So they're desperately looking at how can they get back to this to the situation where everybody was getting their information from the likes of the Sun newspaper, which is when when I was growing up, it was the Sun and the News of the World. That was our political education. It seems fucking hilarious now. It just seems utterly ridiculous. But my politics used to be reading Trevor Cavendash's column in the fucking Sun. Like, that's what they want to get back to. They want to keep that level of ignorance where you're just being given this really simple political worldview and you're not able to see these other ideas. You're just told that these other ideas are bad. Don't even look at them, and that's it. And we're changing that. That's basically our role on the left now, is to kind of build a movement and to raise awareness and kind of raise class consciousness so that people realize there's different ways. There's different ways of doing things. We're constantly having the side pushed up on us that this way of having liberal democracy is the only system that's ever worked, and it's the only system that can ever work. And it's provably bullshit. The best system that we've ever had in this country is not the system that we currently have. The most successful system we ever had was for a very short period of time when we had Clement Attlee in charge, and he gave us the NHS and everything else, and they were showing us something better, and we could have really built on that. But the establishment made sure that it just gradually moved us away from that, and convinced enough people that this was actually a really bad idea. But I mean, the thing is, with, for example, the NHS, the problem that the establishment has is people are really attached to it, so they have to constantly try and undermine it and just gradually chip away at it year after year until they finally get to the point where they can get rid of that, and we end up with a fully marketized system, which is obviously their ultimate goal.
Yeah, and it's why it's really kind of doom. It's kind of doom appealing at the moment to watch the way in which Conservatives just kind of getting away scot-free with being able to essentially tear up the fabric of the political system that we're a part of, and cynically as well. It's not, again, I've always said that I don't think it's ideologically driven. It's just they want power, they want money, they want to be able to protect the interests of the people who pay their bills. And the Owen Paterson case has just shown us that they have no intention of being able to playing by the previous set of rules that they were supposed to be engaging in. And again, it is the failure of liberal democracy, and this is the way in which it's going to tend to when people's material conditions deteriorate. Like and they're going to do everything in their power to make sure that they do not ever lose power moving forward. And it's only by building a wide base of class-conscious people that we're ever going to be able to find a way around that. Otherwise, people are going to be victims of manufactured consent until kingdom come. So that's why we need to use our platforms that we have effectively. And you're absolutely right. It's kind of like a new form of union organizing using social media platforms and social media communities. I think that's a really good analogy. I didn't think of it that way before, but that's a really good way of looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even sure what else to say now. I think we've pretty much covered everything.
Yeah, we really have. We kind of shot the shit today, didn't we?
Yeah, I'm not even sure how long this has gone on for. 1 hour and 20 minutes. I think that's pretty good. Yeah, I think we've covered everything we pretty much need to cover tonight, really, now.
Absolutely. Well, brilliant. I really appreciate you coming on. Obviously, we're looking forward to the Socialist Chat Room on Sunday, where we'll both be talking about the climate meeting in Glasgow, which we're going to have so much to talk about. We should probably do a long show.
Oh, you know what? I'm just, the billionaires are gonna get it. I've got so many fucking one-liners ready for these bastards. The politicians are gonna get it. I'm just gonna give them such a fucking hard time because, it's just the astounding hypocrisy, and they're not gonna be let off the hook on this. So yeah, there's gonna be a lot to prepare. It should be a fun one.
Absolutely, I'm well looking forward to it. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun.
Cool.
And I'm gonna fucking Boris Johnson with that. Oh, we're 5-3 down against the climate. I'm like, Boris, the world's gonna end. Please, can you take it fucking seriously? what fucking state this country's in, Jesus?
Oh my God. We could just literally just choose a random person to be prime minister, and they wouldn't do a worse job. We just get a random drunk off the street and put them in charge of the country. Would you notice the fucking difference?
I mean, a random drunk would probably be better, because at least they'd understand what living like a normal person is, rather than just guy who's got fucking educated at eating with a silver spoon in his mouth his whole fucking life.
Yep. I mean, to be fair, a lot of these guys that you speak to in pubs, they're actually a little bit politically switched on, and like you say, they're in touch with the real world. They've worked real jobs. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly, 100%. You're absolutely right. Do you want to shout out your socials while you're here? Obviously, probably more people know you than I will, but then probably more people know you than know me, but might as well shout out your socials whilst you're here.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter if you're not already at RD Hale, RD_Hale_. I keep forgetting what it is. Yeah, that's it. In any case, yeah, that'll do.
No worries. And you also follow. You want to go subscribe to Council Estate Media on YouTube, and you want to follow RD Hale on Facebook as well.
Yeah, you can do that as well. I'm not as much on Facebook as I am on Twitter, but yeah, feel free.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, and I will see you on Sunday. You take care of yourself.
Okay, I will see you then. Thank you very much. Good night.
See you later. Bye.